The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.
Hello there, and welcome to The Force of Others. I'm Matt Boitner.
I'm Lando Calrissian. I'm Zachary Owen Turner.
And welcoming to the show our first ever repeat guest, Mr. Lance Candler.
Woo!
Hello.
But so welcome everybody to episode 10. There are officially more episodes of The Force of Others than there are of Star Wars movies, which, like I said, when we reached episode 7, just proves that this is a much easier show to produce than a 2.5-hour Star Wars film. But anywho, we got some news to talk about. But speaking of it being episode 10, this week marks the 10th anniversary of Star Wars Rebels, which is wild to think about. We have now reached 10 years of there being filmed Disney Star Wars content, which is a weird thing to think about. But before we dive into all that stuff, Lance, your brow looks furrowed. You got something to say?
Well, when is the Disney purchase?
So that was announced October 2012. I remember that moment. I remember getting to my office job at college. Shout out Oklahoma City University. And like everybody does at an office job, the first thing I did was checked my Facebook.
Oh, excellent, yeah.
And somebody had sent to me, Disney buys Lucasfilm, and then in bold print, plans to release Episode 7 in 2015. And in that moment, I shed my skin and just freaked out and ran around my college for the next
Yeah, it was a news story at the college
hours.
for a bit that kid shed his skin and ran around.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I was
weird.
like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
So was The Force Awakens the first thing Disney released, or is Rebels the first thing Disney?
Rebels came first, because Rebels premiered October 2014. October 4th, I think. It was either October 4th or October 3rd. One of those two. But it is this week. I remember that specifically. It premiered on Disney+. And then, obviously, Force Awakens came out Christmas 2015. Or somewhere around Christmas 2015. So we'll have our 10 years of Force Awakens next year. But this is 10 years of Rebels. Before we get into more times that we can say the number 10 in this episode, let's find out how everybody's Star Wars week was. So, Lance, how was your real-life week, and how did Star Wars find you this week?
Real life week was great. Got a lot done this week. Got a lot of day job work done. And then as far as Star Wars, it was a Star Wars light week. I decided I was going to rewatch all 4 seasons of Rebels in honor of it being 10 years, and I made it through the first season.
Wow.
And then just couldn't do it. There's too much good TV on right now, so I couldn't do it. And I started, not to get off track, but I started watching The Orville just because of the way
good.
Zach talks about it, and so I'm almost completely caught up with The Orville.
It's the best Star Trek show on TV right now.
Yeah, it is, and I've got a headache from the content I am shoving into my head over the last couple of weeks. So thank you guys for that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's what we do. We further infect people with fandom and nerdiness and keep you from being productive. But hopefully we make you have more fun.
Yeah, well, I did make it through 1 season of Rebels, so that's good for a rewatch.
Right on. What about you, Zach?
Yeah, just we've kind of been riding the high of the Skeleton Crew news from last week that we talked about, and just kind of, deep diving more into like Jaleel White and seeing all that. But I have been to bring it up fully into Rings of Power this week. I watched the entire season, second season, and I gotta say, Sauron and Palpatine, some great, parallels there. So
yeah, it really is a good show. So Rings of Power.
Before we started filming, Lance said that he was very into the show.
I was gonna say, as our resident Lord of the Rings hater has returned.
So that's really Lord of the Rings adjacent, which is great. It's Lord of the Rings Prime that I have problems with. So,
but real quick, Lance, thoughts on Rings of Power?
Rings of Power is really great. It does a good job of taking like peripheral Lord of the Rings canon, which is a difficult thing to deal with anyway because Tolkien's canon is all over the place. He rewrote every time somebody asked him a question.
He's
he
George
answered
Lucas.
different.
He rewrote.
I mean, yeah. Well, he's worse than Lucas when it comes to that. But they do a really good job of finding what is like the most reasonable and realistic and cohesive canon and putting it all together. And so, plus it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful show I think that has ever been on TV. So it's a shame it costs, the GDP of a small country in order to make that. But I hope they keep going.
Yeah.
I hope they're getting lots and lots and lots of views and making lots of money on it.
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, they got to the second season, and I'll say I think they fixed their problems in season 1 in a way that I think a lot of Star Wars shows should look at it, because we talk about all the time how a lot of Star Wars shows have pacing problems. And I think Rings of Power season 1 had the same pacing problems, but season 2 I'm not finding any pacing problems. I feel like we're moving faster, more intense. Like I feel like every episode has something huge that's happening, and we're not just like, sitting around a Senate chamber talking. I think the pacing of season 2 is what I'm really enjoying the most, because it's just like, okay, cool, we're on to the next thing. Numenorians, who cares? We're on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of gives me flashbacks to watching early Game of Thrones, where you end every episode standing in the middle of your living room because you can't sit down because it's so exciting. And the first season got a little bit of a snooze fest, especially towards the end. But
yeah,
it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny because, as I've dubbed Lance our resident Lord of the Rings hater, I'm kind of a Lord of the Rings meh. That's me in general. It's like, I like the movies. But I'm not going to watch all 4 movies, all 3 movies at once. Anyway, but then when it comes to Rings of Power, I tried, and I didn't get through the first episode. I got too bored, and I was like, I'm good. And I took a break. But now that both of you especially are talking about how, especially once Zach said pacing, I was like, okay, you have my attention.
Yeah,
but
season 2 is moving.
I'm assuming I need to watch all of the first season for season 2 to make any sense.
Kinda.
Yeah. Okay.
But here's the thing, and this is a major issue with Star Wars too. But nobody ever lets anything get a bad first season and keep going.
Yeah.
And look at The Office. I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but The Office has a terrible first season. If they just canceled it because the first season was bad, look at what we wouldn't get. And you can go through almost every major show, and their first season's awful.
Yep.
Or at least not on par with the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, I brought it up once in the pod. I was like, you remember all of the CW shows? Every single one, you were like, man, season 1 sucks. But if you get to season 2 of Arrow, and then if you get to season 3, The Flash comes in, and then it's really good.
Yeah,
but then you get to like season 9, and it's like, all right.
Well, it's just a cash grab at that point. But yeah, I am an unapologetic Smallville fan. I have watched Smallville all 10 seasons, probably 15 times. And that's a huge chunk of my life watching Smallville. And the first season, the whole Freak of the Week thing is just tough. But you got to get through that. You got to slog through all of that, character development before you can really get into the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to let shows find their footing. Zach brought it up when we had our episode kind of commenting on the Acolyte being over, that Zach was like, how many shows do we let find their footing? And then all of a sudden, season 2, season 3, it's really great. And when you take that into account, I don't think season 1 of The Acolyte was that terrible. It was not amazing, in my opinion. It had some serious problems, in my opinion. But I don't think it was a piece of junk.
Better than
but
season
anyway.
1 of Arrow.
Yeah, well, and I just think that money's so tight. I think the whole film industry is terrified right now.
Yeah.
With kind of movie theaters going away, and so I think that the investors, the actual money behind everything, just get really touchy about things not being successful. Yeah. They need a huge ROI, quick, or get out. So they're taking like regular investment strategy, and they're implementing it into the arts. And it's kind of robbing us from some really good stuff.
That's a good point. One, and I talk about this to death on this show, but it's really, really easy for people to just kind of forget that last year, for 8 months, the entertainment industry shut down.
Yeah.
And then on top of everything being kind of really expensive in life right now, like you said, it's kind of condensed everything to the point of every single thing has to be a blockbuster or it's going to go away.
Yeah.
But anyway, Rebels didn't go away. But what were you gonna say, Zach?
I was just gonna say, and speaking of blockbusters, we got some Mandalorian and Grogu news.
Yes, we do. So this is an interesting one. We've been commenting on leaks lately a lot on the show. Most of them from Daniel RPK on Twitter. And normally, most Star Wars, if somebody can put Star Wars leak or Star Wars rumor on the internet, people like me are going to click on it in the thousands. But when something starts to show up everywhere, at that point, I'm kind of like, all right, Zach and I are like, okay, let's comment on this because it might be real. Yeah. But supposedly, The Mandalorian and Grogu will be the last chapter of the series/show with no future movies or seasons planned. And that Din Djarin is said to appear in future Star Wars projects after the conclusion of this movie, which will be the end of the story for the quote-unquote Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of pass this around. Lance, what are your thoughts on the Mandalorian and Grogu film supposedly being the end of this story?
I always kind of thought it was going to be the end of the story. This wasn't surprising to me. I think so Disney really struck gold with Marvel, with the MCU. Mm-hmm. And I think that is affecting, I think every aspect of the MCU is affecting every aspect of every other media that's coming out right now, really. And so I think that whether we get anything that's called The Mandalorian doesn't really matter. We have the character. Mm-hmm. And so it's a bucket full of characters that they're just going to pour a few out on every movie or show or whatever that they put out for the next 10, 15 years. I mean, look at Iron Man. How many Iron Man movies did we get? How many movies did we get with Iron Man?
Yeah.
Where was his character development? Was it we got that in Iron Man 1, 2, 3, right? But when you think about Iron Man, when you think about the snap, when you think about all the different big scenes he was in, it wasn't necessarily in his franchise movies.
Yeah.
That just built the character. So what if we were having this conversation, Iron Man 3 will be the last Iron Man movie? Well, I mean, you can argue that Captain America Civil War was as much an Iron Man movie as any of the Iron Man movies.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it'll be the same thing with Mando. He'll be a character in the Filoniverse. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lance kind of hit it on the head. It's a sandbox. It's like when you're going to you're going to the recess with all your Star Wars toys, and you go, oh, you got a Mando? Great. I have Luke Skywalker. Let's make them make adventures. Which at its best, that's what Star Wars should be, is like that imagination when you were a kid, like, oh, what if Mando and Ahsoka met up together and then faced Thrawn, which is probably what's going to happen. I think, because they've said that the Thrawn movie is going to be the culmination of this whole Mando universe, which, it's interesting that this is the end of that story because they've dedicated this time as like the Mandalorian era, so I think you're right. I think he's not gone. I think it's probably the end of the Mandalorian and Grogu story. I do also think it's interesting that they say that Din Djarin will come back, but not Grogu. So maybe it's Grogu finally being like, okay, I'm going to be a Jedi, which would be weird because he had his chance and then he said no. So I'm very curious to see what they do with this movie. I think it's gonna be fun, hopefully. But yeah, and I also don't think they get rid of Grogu because he is the cash cow of Disney merch, So we'll see what happens. I think it's not. Again, I'm also not shocked that this is the end of that story, and then he's probably just gonna be bopping around.
Yeah, I agree with everything that both of you said. I find it interesting that they did not mention Grogu as well, but I also find it hard to believe that exactly as I literally wrote it in my notes. Hard to believe they're going to end the Grogu cash cow. I firmly
or the
maintain...
puffer pig, since we're on Rebels episode.
yeah. But I have said this before. I maintain that the plan for the Mandalorian was for Grogu to leave and be gone for a while after season 2. I fully believe that, and I fully believe that Disney was like, wait, what? No. He's going to show up on Book of Boba Fett because the amount of money that we will all make. Which, and again, the business side of it, it's like, hey man, do you have any idea how hard it is to make a show that people want to watch? So let's give them what they want to watch and keep the show on TV, guys. Whereas us actual Star Wars fans, that sounds whatever, us like storytellers and like people that are in the bag for this and want the story to be something that like weighs more than brand recognition, we're going to be like, hey, let's tell a new story with Mandalorian. But this sounds like this could be the end of the Mandalorian and Grogu story, and not necessarily the end of... So it's the end of what the story of the Mandalorian TV show has been.
Yeah.
What is weird about that is, like I said, I think they already ended that story. And I've said my chaos theory before that I fundamentally believed the point for the Mandalorian was going to be for him to be cool with taking his helmet off after the end of season 2. And that we were going to move on. And then Pedro got really famous, and they went, whoops, okay, we're going to tell a story about uniting despite differences. And he's going to keep his helmet on now, so that way the character can go on forever, right? I saw a different interview where Pedro Pascal says, I'll probably be playing Din Djarin for the rest of my life. And he didn't seem upset about it. He was like, I mean, cool. And as an actor, how could you complain? Yeah, I'll show up once every couple years, record a couple hours of dialogue at most, take my huge check, and go be in other movies.
Yeah.
But what this points to me more than anything, because it's important to remember, the Mandalorian and Grogu was announced immediately coming out of the entertainment strike that I talked about a couple minutes ago. It was not announced before that. They ended Mando Season 3 on, let's face it, a reboot. Mando and Grogu sitting on the porch, Carl Weathers literally says to them, this is where you can stay between adventures. Like, this is a reboot. The big picture Mandalorian culture stuff is done. It's about Mando and Grogu. Then we came out of the entertainment strike. Lucasfilm had lost 8 months of prep work on the 3 movies they'd already announced. Daisy Ridley, The Dawn of the Jedi, and Filoni's movie. But Favreau probably had a bunch of ideas kicking around for Mando Season 4. So they probably went, let's just make it a movie. And what I think all of this points to is Jon Favreau's ready to be done with the Mandalorian. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean that as, guys, let's face it. He's been working on this character and this story for probably about 6 years. I don't know that it's ever come out when it was officially pitched by him, but the show premiered in December 2019. And for one way or another, we're coming up on probably 6 years of his life devoted to these characters. And this is a guy that has made so many different movies over his career. He strikes me, I don't know him, obviously, but he strikes me as someone that wants to have freedom to move on to different things whenever he can, and he doesn't want to be tied down to one deal. So it's probably him going, I'm going to end the story that I want to tell with these characters with a big movie, and then I'm going to say, Dave, play. I'm happy to come back and be a producer, an executive producer from time to time, give ideas, bounce ideas off or whatever, but for my active involvement, my prediction is that this is the end of Jon Favreau being the head of this character.
Yeah.
Do you think that Jon Favreau is going to move on from Disney? Or do you think that they're still going to kind of own him for the different franchises?
Oh, I mean,
I don't know. A pretty big hand in Marvel.
Oh, yeah. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think he's like, I'm done with corporate. I'm going to go make Swingers 2. That's not what I'm saying.
But I'm here for it if he makes Swingers 2.
Yeah,
Holy
I mean,
crap.
Can you imagine?
I'd go to the movie theater.
Can you imagine if it's like aged Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn, they go back to those characters and they're still losers, and it's Swingers 2, still swinging. I would watch that movie. It'd be awesome. But no, I think it's just as simple as he wants to have the freedom to be able to do whatever. It's not like he's not still going to show up as Happy Hogan in Spider-Man 4. 100% that'll happen. But I don't know. He strikes me as someone that likes to have.
I mean, he was just in Deadpool.
Likes to be agile, huh?
He was just in Deadpool, so
Oh yeah,
he's in
briefly.
Deadpool and Wolverine.
He was he?
When Deadpool
Yeah.
goes to audition for the Avengers, and you think it's going to be Robert Downey Jr., and then it's
That's right.
Happy Hogan. He's like, "Are you
That's
an
right.
Avenger?" And he's like, "I'm an Avenger."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. I mean, there's 10,000 cameos in that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all of our thoughts on the Mandalorian and Grogu being the end of the Mandalorian story. Well,
Yeah.
okay. Zach, do you want me to hand the reins to you for Rebels, or do you want me
Sure,
to stay
I
in
can-
charge of the horse?
I can take it over. So 10 years of Rebels, a show that I don't know about you guys, but when it first came out, I was like, "What is this kid crap?" And now is one of my favorite Star Wars media. Lance, what are your opening thoughts on Rebels? Did you have the same experience where you're like, "What is this animation? This isn't the Clone Wars."
Well, I started with Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, I started with Rebels, and
Yes.
it wasn't until I was well into Rebels that Matthew just arm twisted me into watching the Clone Wars. I was going back and listening to that episode of the podcast, and I think Matthew creates his own friends. Have you thought about that? If you go back and look at how he influences everybody, I think he's building friends like in a lab so that we all have his same interests. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about building friends, but I will shamelessly talk to my nerdy friends about Star Wars.
Yeah. Anyway, so I started with Rebels.
Passion inspires passion.
Yeah, and so I remember this was back when people had cable, and I used to have was it
Disney
X?
XD.
Disney XD.
Yeah.
And anytime you watched anything on Disney XD, they always had the little characters in the bottom corner of the screen
Yeah.
for advertising whatever the other show is. And so they had Star Wars Rebels, and they were advertising the heck out of it. And I liked Star Wars casually back then, and so I thought I would try it out. And the first episode of Rebels is really good,
Yeah.
and so it kind of grabbed a hold of me, and I was all the way through really that first season before I started looking at Clone Wars. But I think the important thing that Rebels did was it gave us a more cost-efficient animated TV show, one that Disney was willing to actually pay for.
Yes.
And it showed us that you can do that and it still be really great television. I mean, the Clone Wars was kind of a unique piece of quality in all aspects. Rebels does not have that quality in all aspects, mainly visually, but it's still so good. And so it shows what good story is. You don't have to throw millions and millions and millions of dollars at something to wow us with the explosions. It doesn't have to be Michael Bay. You can have a really good story, make it a lot cheaper, and we get 4 seasons of something that we wouldn't have got with the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
So
Matt, what are your opening thoughts?
You're right on. Everything Lance said and more. Now I feel like I need to evaluate myself and figure out if I'm building friends. I guess not intentionally.
hey,
Anywho.
you have given us so much value to our lives with these different interests.
You should like what I like. Well, anywho, but yeah, so the biggest thing about Rebels for me is that it is the first post-George Lucas Star Wars.
Yeah.
I remember as the episode was starting for the premiere of the series, I was just rubbing my hands together and I was so excited because I thought, again, how the perception of George Lucas has changed over the last 10 years. I was like, here we go. We're moving into the golden era because now crazy wackadoodle George is gone. and just Dave Filoni and everybody else can take the lead, and they can take the amazing universe that he built and make it better. And it's funny, Rebels more than anything was after the first season, Rebels became, for me personally, a week in and week out exercise in accepting what the show is and not what I thought it was going to be or what I thought it was going to do. Because while I love Rebels now, at the time, I wasn't really head over heels about it on almost a week-to-week basis, but looking back, it's mostly because of my own expectations of what I thought they were going to do as opposed to what they did, and that happened time and time and time again. And a lot of what they did is incredible, but kind of like you said, Lance, it's also worth pointing out that this show and Resistance are the only Star Wars shows to ever come out on Disney XD, on TV, on a children's cartoon network, right? Not Cartoon Network, Disney Cartoon Network. And for a lot of that, like, Clone Wars grew up to a degree over its run that Rebels never did. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing now, but I think you can see that in the storytelling a lot, that as good as it is, they kind of had to keep it from getting too adult in many times. I'm not saying your Star Wars has to get, like, terrifying, but, you know, at the end of the day, Ahsoka decapitates 4 people in one move in the middle of Clone Wars. I don't know, does Rebels ever do anything remotely like that?
No, I mean they get serious though. They
absolutely
you get the
do.
Vader, Ahsoka stuff. You get the Maul stuff. You know,
they absolutely do. But I felt a lot of the time it felt like there were some network TV constraints on the show at points. That's all I'm trying to say. I love Rebels. I'm trying to get all my negatives out of the way, or for the most of them, right? But it's funny. The biggest thing for me was I thought we were moving into an era at the time. Thought we were moving into an era of this is only going to be good from here on out because George is out the way. And now I'm like, sometimes it might be nice to have George Lucas around still.
Yeah.
But overall, I think that Rebels is, in the Disney era, it might be my favorite story that actually has an ending. Is what I would say. There are stories that haven't wrapped up yet, but overall, I think that this narrative has the best beginning, middle, and end of the Disney Lucasfilm era.
Yeah, I was real slow to getting on the Star Wars Rebels train because I think we were watching Clone Wars at the time in college, Matt and I going through all of it, and then Rebels came out. We lived together, you know, like I'd come home from class and we'd be like, all right, let's watch 3 episodes, 4 episodes, 10 episodes of Clone Wars. And I remember seeing the animation style for Rebels and being like, nope, I'm not going to do it. Those stormtroopers look bad. Like, why are they so shiny? What is going on? And I don't know if it was Matt who watched it first but somebody was like, you know, give it a chance. It's actually pretty good. And I was blown away by that first episode. Like you said, Lance, I don't think we've ever gotten in Star Wars media a recreation that does so well of creating Luke looking at the sand dunes, looking at the twin suns, as you do with Ezra in his tower looking at the city.
Wow.
You know, it's like that's the parallel for me that I was like, oh, this is going to be very good. And the characters are great too. Does it have its problems? Is it a little too kiddie at certain points? Yeah, you know, but it was a kid's show. But for me, my trepidation with the show was because I thought it was going to be, in my head, I thought it would end up what eventually Resistance became. You know, like that's how kiddie Resistance was. I thought that's what Rebels would be. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, this is actually great storytelling, great character development. But let's get more into it. Lance, what are your biggest likes from the show?
I thought it did a good job of kind of connecting what we already know into the larger universe, the larger Star Wars universe, whether it's character based or force based. You know, the Force, capital F, in the Skywalker saga is a very specific thing, right? Now it kind of frayed a little bit with Rey and with everything kind of in the end of 9, when Palps comes back and all that. But spoilers if you haven't seen it.
Somehow.
Yeah, but other than that, it's a pretty consistent, pretty solid line of what the Force does. When you get into Rebels, the Force is crazy. I mean, I don't want to get too into it right now, but the world between worlds is crazy. The Bendu is crazy. Like everything that's happening. Ezra being like Dr. Doolittle, like the whole everything that comes up with the Force, it blows it wide open for what the Force is capable of doing. But it also gives us a full, complete, compelling set of characters that is not original trilogy based. I mean, it's not even really saga.
Well, I mean, you have Lando
based.
Calrissian in it.
You have some of those characters that cross over. I mean, you have Mon
No, because
Mothma.
Ezra uses his name as a moniker all the time.
Oh yeah. I forgot about
And
that.
Jabba.
Yeah, and Jabba.
And Jabba.
That's
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the pilot. And I think that's a couple episodes later. They come back and they call him Jabba.
Yes, they do.
But yeah, no, you definitely have some crossover with some stuff. But the main characters don't really have anything to do with. I mean, they kind of retconned them into all of the OT stuff. But it's a completely separate story that is so compelling that they're still making it.
Yeah.
I mean, we just got live action Ezra this year, so clearly people liked it.
Yeah. How crazy that we're I mean, like, we say it all the time. It's like, yeah, cartoons. Like, for a while they were just like, this is cartoons and this is live action, and now we're getting those cartoon characters in the live action, and that's insane when you think about it.
Yeah, because it always went the other way, right?
Yes.
You would have a live action something that was a big thing, and then they'd come back and say, "Well, we're going to make a cartoon because it's way cheaper." And then it got to be not cheaper to make a cartoon, and it goes the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Matt.
I mean,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, going back to droids in the '80s, you know, R2D2 and C3PO. People forget they had a show for a couple years, a little cartoon show. Granted,
Ewoks, too.
have not watched it. At Ewoks, they also got a show. Haven't watched either of them. I probably should, and then we'll review it on the podcast. We talked about it in another episode. You was it when Lance was on?
Maybe.
Did we talk about it?
I think it was. I have a funny thing about Ewoks. So
Hit it.
You know the Battle of Endor and Courage. What's the other one?
Oh, Caravan of Courage.
Caravan of Courage.
And yeah.
So funny thing, young Lance had both of those on video. Watched them. Did not realize they were Star Wars. I thought they were their own separate thing for like a decade before I went, oh my gosh, that's the fuzzy little teddy bears from Return of the Jedi. So
That's fantastic. That's something that I should also rewatch. I saw one of the two Ewok live action movies when I was like 10, and I think at that point, you know, even then, grumpy Star Wars fan Matt was like, "No, this is not my Star Wars," and never watched it again. I've gotten better, but likes for Rebels. That initially it was a polar opposite from Clone Wars. Clone Wars is a buffet where, you know, we're going to get some episodes with Anakin and Ahsoka. We're going to get some episodes with clones. We're going to get some episodes with the D-Squad. We're going to jump to 3 years ago and then jump to the end, and that we're going to go everywhere, which could be any number of things, and mostly I think it was George going, jump around, it's more fun. Stop it. Who cares? They know the story. Tell different parts of the story. We're going to have an episode about banking deregulation. Kids are going to love it. And then you forget that those episodes go on this 3-episode arc. But Rebels is a chronological focused story on a group of people. That the simplest way that I've heard it pitched is it's if you liked Firefly, imagine Firefly as a cartoon in Star Wars.
hey,
That's a great pitch.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's the Serenity right there,
Yeah.
and then I've got t-shirt time. I got my Ahsoka shirt.
Excellent.
I got J Guys from Rex. Also,
Yeah.
I also have a Serenity plaque on my desk. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, Matt's mom bought me this shirt. So.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
But so the chronological focus story, and like I said before, I think they crushed the beginning, middle, and end for these characters. But other things that I like from this show, there were Rebels. What Rebels did really, really, really well was incorporating things from Legends, but not like canonizing a one-for-one version of the Star Wars legend of that story, because not all of it works, but the idea of it can work. So like Inquisitors, they've been in Legends in totally different ways, mostly as like just other easy to defeat minions for characters, so that you don't have to have your character defeat Darth Vader, right?
Yeah.
But this brought in a version of the Inquisitors that I still love, and we're still seeing in canon today. And outside of the weird characterization of Reva, I've pretty much liked every Inquisitor that we've ever had. But then also, like a weird thing, the TIE Defender.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like the boss, or it's like the main story of the TIE Fighter video games that they then make like, this is what Thrawn was working on. And if they hadn't made a Death Star, they'd have made this. Which
and
I just thought
possibly
was...
won.
And probably had a way better chance at winning. Like, I still love that story. And I mean, just, we're going to talk about it more later, but talk about canonizing a legend, canonizing Grand Admiral Thrawn. And I'll talk more about that later on. But other things that I love, just real quick, from the show that will stick out to me as some of my favorite pieces of Star Wars forever. The Darksaber episode with Sabine. Sabine's Jedi training at that point, I maintain that Filoni had no idea that she had the Force. But he just came up with that idea later and was like, why not? We're going to do it. That Darksaber episode is well worth watching. Trials of the Darksaber, Season 3. Like, if nothing else, cue up that one from time to time. Other episodes, Twin Sons.
Ooh,
with Maul and Ben Kenobi.
Such a
that
good episode.
It's great. It's great. It's real quick. I remember at the time being annoyed because it's like, why are you shoehorning Ezra into this story? And now I have grown up and gone, right, because it's Ezra's show, Matt, idiot. But it's just phenomenal. We'll talk more about it later because we got Maul coming later in the episode. But just as nothing else, a way to show how Obi-Wan has grown and Maul is the same guy he was in Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
But then, and then also, I maintain probably the most emotionally gut-wrenching death of a Jedi in Star Wars canon to this point is the death of Kanan Jarrus.
Yeah.
Or Caleb Doom, depending on how accurate you're going to be with what you call him. It's just awesome. The pigment of his eyes coming back, pure self-sacrifice. You can see it coming a mile away.
Yeah.
All of us grown people are like, wait, why are you picking them up on the top of a fuel cell? Pick them up somewhere else, man. That's a terrible idea. What are you doing? But just the way they execute that story is just wonderful. And then the end of Ezra's arc. Again, at the time, I remember Lance and I were like, space whales are how you defeat Grand Admiral Thrawn. I love the Purgle now. I think they're super cool. And just to take Dr. Doolittle in Star Wars, Ezra, and take that specific kind of way into the Force and make it how Star Wars has always been since 1977. It has been about how the natural world beats technology and how faith beats just machines and all that stuff, right? Use the Force. You've switched off your targeting computers. What's wrong? Thrawn could not anticipate giant Purgle coming and wrapping their tendrils around his ship and taking him into a different galaxy. So, and therefore, that's how you beat him. It's Ezra connecting with the natural world, with the force of others. I did it. And just that arc and Ezra being such a little butthead for most of the show, but transitioning into like ultimate self-sacrifice. It's good stuff. So, okay, I have word vomited all of my likes. Zach, take over.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you both kind of hit all of the big things. For me, it's I think what I like the most about it is that first season, they did such a good job at just focusing on and building this family. And then at the end of season 1, that's when you bring in Ahsoka, and that's when you bring in Rex, and that's what, like, they did such a good job of waiting to incorporate the rest of the universe and all the other cameos and, like, build up, like, they did a good job of just waiting to connect it to everything and just being like, okay, let's focus on these people, let's focus on their stories, and then we'll enrich them with Ahsoka and Maul and Thrawn, I think who's the villain? The Callus is the villain in the first season,
him and the Inquisitor.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and Inquisitors, I think, oh man, I love the Inquisitors. I love them as a concept. I ran a Star Wars RPG. It's like 3-shot all about, but I had all the players play Inquisitors, and man, it was insane because you're just like. It's such like to have a ranking system, like I'm the first brother, I'm the second sister, it's such a good way of like just instantly creating status and power struggle amongst these dark side users. And yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about Maul, Thrawn, Ahsoka, the crew and all that, but that kind of hits my major likes. Lance, did you have any dislikes?
I did. I have kind of a hot take dislike.
Good. Cool.
The music, and it gets better. The music, starting from the beginning, really, really bothered me. Mm-hmm. I felt like Disney buys Lucasfilm. They get access to everything, everything in the toy box, right? Including all the music that Williams wrote. And they just chopped everything up and poured it all out all over the first season with a complete irresponsible use of themes, of motives, everything. I mean, they had what is that song called? Across the Stars, which is Padme and Anakin's theme. They pulled motives from Across the Stars and were just playing it all over the place. Go back and watch when they go into the temple on Lothal for the first time. Why are they playing pieces of that song over the top of them walking through the Lothal Jedi temple?
Well, and something I noticed in the first episode, they play Princess Leia's theme when they've rescued the Wookiees.
Yes.
And it's like, I get it, you're trying to pull on the classic Star Wars emotion, but George told Kevin Kiner, same composer for Rebels and Clone Wars, and he said, you are not allowed to use any of the Star Wars motives in Clone Wars. You get, like, the Force theme every now and then, but all new stuff. Stop it. But anyway, back to you.
Well, and the ba-da-da-da-da-da, like the Force, the little Force thing, oh my gosh, I swear they just had that on a button, and they were just pressing it every time they wanted to show that Ezra was using the Force. And it drove me crazy. I mean, that was Obi-Wan's little small motive from
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan.
And it drives me crazy. And it got better. It became more like through composed as they got later on in the season, but everything was just chopped up, just a casserole of Star Wars music. And I don't know, bugged me.
Matt,
do you have other do you have other dislikes, Lance? This is your opportunity to be negative. Let it out. Complain.
So here's something about me. And I think this is a good aspect. I don't really hold on to things that I don't like. I'm like dislike blind when it comes to a show. Which is why I can watch some of the worst pieces of media ever created and still like it, because the things that I don't like it just pass through. I'm like a filter, and I just catch the stuff that I do like about it. And so people will say, oh my gosh, that was terrible. I'll say, really? I thought it was okay. And they'll say, well, what about this, and this? And I'll say, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That stuff was bad. But if you can ignore that, you can really get this good stuff over here. So I when I think back to Rebels, I don't really think about anything I didn't like. I mean, I didn't like their plastic hair, but other than that, it was fine.
I can confirm this about you. I remember when we went to see the Suicide Squad like the Suicide Squad, the one with Will Smith. I can't remember the director.
That's the first one, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
the
is
first one.
objectively not a good movie.
And I remember
David
coming
Ayer.
out, and you were just, and I remember I was complaining about it, and yeah, I was being a little too into it, like how much I didn't like it, and you were like, Matt, just stop not liking everything. Like, it's okay.
Yeah, and people, not you, but people, they get kind of this superiority by not liking things, and I think that's kind of a viral infection of the fandom right now. Is if you don't like something, that makes you smarter than that thing.
Yeah.
And what a terrible way to live your life. I mean, just always trying to convince everybody that you're smarter than whatever the interaction is. You know, and I get that. I was having a conversation with somebody about Rings of Power. And they didn't like it because of something that they felt like didn't work with Tolkien lore. Now, it in fact did work with Tolkien lore.
Ooh, get him.
They just had not read the Silmarillion, and I, your resident Lord of the Rings hater, have read it twice. And so I like to know about
I think
things
you might
I don't
actually like Lord of the Rings lands.
I won't admit it. Yeah. But if you discount an entire franchise or an entire piece of media because of a couple things you don't like, I don't care if 99% of it is bad. You can still enjoy that 1%. So anyway, my dislikes, I don't really have a lot of dislikes. I thought the music was irresponsible.
I like that. That is a good way to live your life, and now I'm gonna say my dislikes anyway.
He's gonna go straight through your filter
to look really bad.
But that is real. It's worth pointing out that I don't even think it's up for debate. Art is subjective, and it's the people that treat things as like, this was objectively terrible. This is a factually bad thing. It's like, stop it. Your opinions are not facts. Like, I don't care. You can say that they are, but you're wrong. This is not how life works. It's not how language works. It's not what the definition of those words are. Right? And you're not better than, I've said it before on the show. Stop trying to bully people because they don't like something you don't like. You know what I mean? If anything, bully them into liking what you like and then make friends.
There you go.
Which might be what I've been doing. I hope not. Anyway, so my dislikes, honestly, I kind of set it up before. He has grown on me, but on my first watch and my first couple years of this show existing, I straight up didn't like Ezra Bridger. In a way that Ahsoka annoyed me initially in the first couple seasons of Clone Wars. I think it was mostly my age at the time. When she's calling R2 R2-y and calling Anakin Sky Guy, I was like, what is this like? This is a little kid in Star Wars. This is dumb. Now that I'm like grown, I would be like, yeah, good. It's fun. That's hilarious. I like that a kid is being a kid in these death-defying situations. But Ezra is kind of a little butthead, and nobody ever really calls him on it. Like, he does things on this show, and they're all just like, oh, Ezra being Ezra. That if Ahsoka had done that, they'd been like, hey, what? No, you're in Jedi timeout for a week. Go hang out with the slow-moving Jedi on a cane and learn that you have to be less of a jerk. I can't remember that character's name right now.
The turtle Jedi.
Yeah, the Turtle Jedi. Lightsaber Lost. Fantastic Clone Wars episode. I got everything but his name. But where they would literally... Ezra rarely got punished for being a little idiot, in my opinion. That was something that really bothered me about the show. Again, but to turn this dislike into a like I said before, in those last couple episodes, the way he grows up is awesome. And to jump forward to wider Star Wars canon, the way he's portrayed in Ahsoka is excellent. I absolutely love him. He's become kind of this mix of like the hippie, not rule follower that he always was, also with a little bit of the Kanan Jarrus cowboy Jedi. Like, it's all there, and I truly hope we get more Ezra content. I don't want to butcher the actor that portrays his name, but that man was quite literally born to play Ezra Bridger. They got to put him in blue contacts, I guess, but it's wild. You're watching Ezra in the flesh. It's crazy. But anyway, other dislikes. It's awkward. But Sabine Wren. In a way that a lot of people threw hate towards Rey that I never really agreed with, I think a lot of those criticisms apply to Sabine. Outside of a couple moments where her character does face legit challenges, and in those moments she was most interesting to me. But for a lot of the show, she's kind of amazing at everything and doesn't ever really struggle, when every other character on the show kind of does. And I know that's a really simplistic thing, because overall I really like the story that they've told and that they're telling with the character. I think it's good stuff. But she struck me as a very corporate insert character. Let's have a cool punk rock Mando that spray paints her armor, and her hair's always a different color, and she doesn't listen to anybody, man. She ain't your daddy's, like, Star Wars character. And also, she never fails at anything. She does. When she's having this... Well, rarely. When she's having the shootout with Fen Rao, it's this big, intense thing, and they're gonna... It's so scary, and then she shoots the blaster out of his hand. That's also just, I guess, cop's kid. I'll out myself. That's not how... That doesn't work like that. And in Star Wars, if it works like that, then you shouldn't ever have to kill anybody ever, right? If you can just shoot the blaster out of their hand. It was just, I don't know. I thought they steered away from challenges. And then when they gave her challenges, they were incredible. But, so there's a whiny thing. But the only other thing, I thought that, this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier, where I felt like the show had network TV constraints on it. Rebels, while it is a chronological story, you could also kind of tell, it felt like a corporate mandate to me, that the show needed to in some ways be something that you could tune in and watch an episode having missed the last 3 or 4, right? Because like Kanan gets blinded at the end of season 2, struggles with it in the first episode, and after that is basically a Jedi again, right? Ezra flirts with the dark side at the end of season 2, and that doesn't even last a whole episode. It is never mentioned again. Yes, Maul, manipulates him several times, but he's never really flirting with the dark side. Sabine leaves to be with her Mando family and is back 2 episodes later. It's kind of like the Mando and Grogu having this big emotional goodbye, and then they're back together shortly thereafter, which, again, I get it. You need to have people be able to tune in and not have missed much. But that's outside of that, on a show that I absolutely loved, there were my little quibbles. So, Zach, I'm passing the baton to you.
Yeah. I also ran into Ezra as a character when it first started. I was like, oh, this is Aladdin. Oh, wait, this is really just Aladdin. Wait, is he going to grow, or is he just going to be Aladdin? But I agree. I think he really grew up. I remember really, really, really hating his dark side arc. I remember just being like, what is going on? Like, why is he so... It's my same problem with Harry Potter Book 5. When teenagers get too teenage angsty, which is that entire book, I'm like, God, just get over it. Get over it. Can we move on? Like, this is such an uncomfortable place to just live in for a little bit. Like, come on, let's move on. I would disagree about Sabine. I think she had some really big challenges, though. The whole Darksaber arc, the fact that she created a thing that killed all the Mandos, that had the electrifying frying in your suit thing.
I just wanted to say those were the 2 challenges, because outside of that, the biggest thing she has to overcome is that in season 1 she doesn't trust Hera when Hera's like, hey, we're getting secret intel, and Sabine's like, from where? And she's like, I can't tell you. Deal. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I also am like Lance, where I feel like I'm also a filter of like, I largely forget the things that I don't like, and then I'm like, hey, you remember that? But I like to see the positive side of things and try and focus on those. So I think that's all I can remember for my dislikes. And there was something in the last season with one of the Sith architect. He was just like so overly evil, like, I'm an evil guy, but
Minister Hayden, I loved him.
But yeah, that's my short dislikes. Well, we've talked about him a little bit. Lance, you want to talk about Maul and your thoughts on the return of Maul.
So I think that if Qui-Gon is great every time he's in a story, if he's my go-to always good, Maul is on the villain side. I love, Sidious is my favorite villain, but Maul is my favorite evil character. He just, every time they keep bringing him back because he's so good. And what I like about Rebels Maul, so we still get the duelist, right? We still get the fighter, but we get like mental, emotional, like manipulator, like playing mind games and strategy and just like piecing together what he wants without having to use his lightsaber. And when he does use his lightsaber, I mean, it's especially in that first episode, he's fighting off those Inquisitors or whatever. He's gaining the trust of all these people, and he's not just this mindless warrior, which in episode 1, he didn't really have time to be anything other than that, right? They gave him a cool lightsaber. They hired a guy that does the spinny, and he did his thing, and it was wonderful, and it's one of the best lightsaber duels of all time. But we didn't get to really know the guy, and this gives us, ooh, what a cool character. And I wrote him down. We get some of the best quotes from the show from Maul. So he said, "The Sith took everything from me." Right?
Yeah.
Ripped me from my mother's arms, which, if you've read Plagueis, it's true. Murdered my brother, used me as a weapon, and then cast me aside. And so you get to see the tragedy of Maul, not just, not a good guy gone bad, but a bad guy forgotten.
Yeah.
A bad guy that's only useful when he's bad. He spent his entire life from the time he was an infant for one purpose, and then failed at that purpose, and then gets treated like trash. And in Clone Wars, literal trash. He is half garbage for a little bit, waist down. So no, I love him. His other quote I wrote down for this was, I was apprenticed to the most powerful being in the galaxy once. I was destined to become so much more. And Witwer, just the way he does all that stuff is so great. So yeah. And we get we talked about it before, but we get the rematch, the Obi-Wan Maul rematch in the desert, which was perfectly choreographed, perfectly designed. It's not a lightsaber duel, it's a character development.
Yeah.
And that's another one that I remember watching it. In fact, I think Matt and I were roommates at that point, and we were standing in the living room watching it on the TV in front of it, like a foot from the TV, because it was just, we thought it was going to be this big, Duel of the Fates rematch, and it was, but like Matt said earlier, it showed you how much Obi-Wan has grown from that time, and it's one of the best parts of Star Wars lore. So yeah. I love Maul in Rebels.
Matt?
Yeah, he's great. I'll touch on it more later, but one of my favorite, just if I have some time in an afternoon and I want to watch, 40 minutes of Star Wars, I'll turn on Twilight of the Apprentice, the finale of Rebels Season 2, and I'll just watch that. Maul's return, right? And then culminating, of course, in Ahsoka's duel with Vader and all that. Just so much good stuff. But my dad, who loves, you want to talk about holding on to dislikes, man, love you, Dad, but let's face it. He comes walking through the room while I'm staring at the TV because Maul is there. Call me old master and all that stuff. And Dad was like, "Is that Darth Maul? Huh?" And sits down and watches and goes, "This is pretty cool." And I was like, "I know, Dad."
Your dad, who, when I first met him, because we were going to a Star Wars convention, he goes, "Oh, great, you're into that Star Wars thing too."
I remember my dad telling me when I was probably 10 or 11, because I was watching Star Wars for the 75th time that weekend or whatever, right? And he goes, "Matthew, when you're older, you're not going to like this as much anymore." And I was like, "I don't know, Dad." And he was wrong.
I always tell your dad that Star Wars is just too cerebral for him, and it drives him crazy.
Well, Okay, anyway, love you, Dad. You're taking some body blows right now, but neither here nor there. Maul is just so great on this show. So great. And like Lance talked about, he's that Twin Sons episode and that duel between with him and Ben Kenobi. That is my favorite villain death in the franchise. I really think. And it's funny, I remember, while Lance and I were standing at the time, I remember at least me, it might have been both of us, I was severely let down by the duel on the first time. And it took me watching a great show that Star Wars YouTube did over the run of Rebels Recon. Weekly. You would get behind-the-scenes stuff about the episode. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I really, really wish they would still do that. But you got everybody. You got Filoni on there all the time. You got Whitwer regularly. Anyway, Andy Gutierrez was the host of that show, and she crushed. But it took me seeing a breakdown of Dave Filoni saying that, like, first off, Maul cues him up, right? Like, or are you protecting someone? And Obi-Wan immediately goes, Ewan McGregor, right? And so then Maul goes into the pose. It becomes a samurai game of chess, right?
Yeah.
He hits that stance, I'm going to match this one. And then Obi-Wan's like, wait, no, I don't fight in wars anymore. And he does the Alec Guinness pose. And Maul switches his stance, and then he goes, I know how I'm going to beat him. And he goes Qui-Gon Jinn. And you see it on Maul's face. He's going to go for the move that he used to kill Qui-Gon Jinn. Ben knows that's coming and takes him down in 2 strikes of the lightsaber.
Yeah.
Or it might be 3. And at the time, that all flew over, I'm pretty sure, both of our heads.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember going, why are you going to build up a whole episode of this fight and then have it last 5 seconds? Whatever. But then seeing what that story is, that it is there, that Ben Kenobi has become a samurai warrior, that it's not a Force Unleashed style of lightsaber dueling, it's chess. It makes the silly, really silly lightsaber duel between Alec Guinness and Darth Vader in Star Wars Episode 4 a little better, because while the reason that duel is quite bad is because they couldn't do very much with the lightsabers yet, right? They were heavy and awkward and kept breaking. But to me, I'm able to now kind of squint and go, okay, they're just operating on another level where their strikes are very precise. And that's the way I'm able to kind of just headcanon it.
Yeah.
But
and also Alec Guinness was an old man when he did that.
It's true. It's very, very true. Anyway, I just love Maul on this show, and one of the missing pieces of Star Wars is a sidebar, because the last time we saw Maul before this show was the end of his arc on Mandalore in Season 5 of Clone Wars, and Sidious is like, I have other uses for you. And we spent 3 years going, what is that? What does that mean? It might have been 4, waiting. And then he just shows up in a cave on an ancient Sith planet, and we're like, what? Talking about how he's been cast aside and stuff. Eventually, that gap has gotten filled in with Son of Dathomir, that great comic book, at least what Sidious had him planned for. But then he shows up in Solo, which, real-world time, comes out after Rebels is over, I was pretty sure.
I think so.
Because, that movie came out in 2018. Rebels ended, like, months before that movie came out. And out of nowhere, Darth Maul shows up. And you find out that he was this crime lord in between. The story that we still don't have is how he went from the head of Crimson Dawn to trapped in a cave on Malachor.
Yeah.
Do you think they're saving that for a TV show or a movie, or do you think we're going to get a comic?
My guess is it was going to be in the planned John Kasdan written sequels that will now likely not happen.
Yeah.
Because Solo didn't crush. And then there was that recent interview with Alden Ehrenreich where he was like, I mean, I might come back if the story's good. I don't think Solo 2 is ever going to happen, as sad as it is to say. So he might have had ideas, and at this point, they may very well be saving it for something, but it's probably going to be a while. I would doubt if he's going to show up in Lando or something.
Oh, yeah.
But But anyway, so there's my novel about Maul. Zach, thoughts about Maul?
I mean, Maul is one of my favorite characters of all time. I think he might be my favorite Star Wars villain. So anytime I get a second of him, I'm like, hell yeah. Sorry to curse. But that introduction, because Maul in Clone Wars is all rage and like, I am wronged and I'm gonna, and even Clone Wars Season 7, he starts to switch a little bit to more cerebral, but to get that full switch, like Lance said, to like, I now am mature and I have been wronged so much that I know what to do and I'm focused, I mean, when he finds out Kenobi's still alive and that scream, holy moly. Talk about Sam Witwer.
How did we forget?
Right? Oh my gosh, the Kenobi! He's like, he's still alive. But I think, what's his name? Freddie Prinze Jr. says it best. He's Sisyphus. He is the guy that is pushing the rock up the hill and will never see the end of it. And even when he dies in Obi-Wan's arms, his last words are is he the one, and he's like, yes, and he goes, he will avenge us. He's still got it wrong, he's still so misguided, but still so true to his character that he's like, oh, he will avenge us. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I love that character. I love Sam Witwer's portrayal. I love that we got a reserved, I can actually give you character development Maul. Because you get a little bit of it in Clone Wars, but it is just so fueled by rage and, drive that you don't get the, intricacies that I feel like you get in Rebels. But I love Maul. I love Old Master. Also, I was reading today, he was originally supposed to die in Twilight of the Apprentice. He was supposed to face Darth Vader, and Darth Vader was going to kill him, but then they were like, there's not really an emotional thing here. It's just kind of, we want to see Darth Vader and Darth Maul fight. And I think the restriction of that and giving us that final death by Obi-Wan is such a move that takes such restraint, and I applaud that, because it is so easy to be like, yeah, we have Darth Vader and Darth Maul on the same planet, in the same building. Why fight? Make them fight, and for whoever it was, probably Dave Filoni, to be like, no, hold on, let's think about this. We can do something more with this character, make him better, and make him have a better ending. But yeah.
Well, and this was back in the Star Wars era, where when people died, they stayed dead, so they had to be really careful with that. Nowadays, you can kill him and he'll come back.
Nowadays, you could get stabbed just like Qui-Gon and come back 5 times.
You get a cybernetic stomach and you're good to go.
So Lance and I do have some dislikes.
I was gonna say that's true.
Well, speaking of bad guys, what are your thoughts on Thrawn, Lance?
Well, after that whole speech about how I don't really have dislikes, so I know. Hold on, just a second. So Thrawn annoyed the heck out of me through this show, because the man could literally have his shorts on fire and he would stare deep into space and say, this is all going according to my plan. This is exactly what I wanted to happen. And just, hell can be raining down on him, and he likes to pretend like that's exactly what he wanted. And maybe it is. Maybe I just don't get Thrawn. I have not read the Timothy Zahn novels.
You should.
And I need to. It's on my list. I started one of them with an audiobook. I need to go back and do it. But I never really got Thrawn. I think the whole idea of him being obsessed with culture's art in order to figure out how to defeat them was maybe a good idea that wasn't explained very well or presented very well in Rebels. I don't know. He steals that thing from Hera, and now he knows everything about what's her race.
Twi'leks.
Yeah.
That's a big one. I should have known that one. Now he knows everything about Twi'leks, the French people with head tails. Which, did you notice that Hera gets inexplicably a French accent when she goes home? I
love that.
It's the idea that then once you're around your parents, you resort to who you were as a kid again.
Yeah, you fill in those roles. That was well done. No, Thrawn didn't really do it for me. I'm really hoping that Ahsoka builds him up a little bit better in my head. Everybody loves Thrawn, so I know that maybe I'm wrong, but not my guy.
All right, Matt.
Right on. Well, so I have read the Thrawn trilogy. I highly recommend it. I will say, sidebar, we've talked about it before. I think the first time it got brought up was when Tabletop Empire came on the show. Shout out. But Timothy Zahn, the writer, really likes details, and that's the hardest thing to get through. He's not as detail-oriented in those books as he is in the later Thrawn novels that I know Zach is a big fan of. But he really gets into the minutia sometimes, and it's like, okay. But those three novels, the Thrawn trilogy, are almost, in my opinion, required reading for deep Star Wars fans, if nothing else, because a lot of the content we're getting right now is canon adaptations of that. So it's fun to know where these things came from. Mount Tantus on the Bad Batch, that's from the Thrawn novels. Thrawn in general, from the Thrawn novels. The whole idea for the character originally in 92 or 93, whenever that first book came out, was Timothy Zahn said, okay, if there was a Star Wars Episode 7, it would make sense for them to have a villain that was completely different from Darth Vader and the Emperor. So this is not a soldier villain. This is not a Force villain. This is their Moriarty. This is the intelligent villain who can anticipate anything that you're going to throw at him. And so the only way to defeat him is to defeat him with something he absolutely could not anticipate.
Space whales.
Yeah, exactly. But there's no way he could see that coming.
None of us saw it coming.
Yeah, the Bendu saw it coming, but that was it. But I think that and the idea of him using art is a touchy, using art to know everything about a species or about a race is a touchy subject for me. It happens in the first chapter of the Thrawn novels, where there's this engagement, there's this spaceship battle that's about to happen between Thrawn's Star Destroyer and like 3 New Republic assault things. And they're all like, okay, we gotta go. And Thrawn's like, no, I got him. And he's sitting in his chambers looking at all these paintings. And they're like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, study art. These are the most famous paintings from that captain's culture, and I know, off of the way his culture makes art, he will not be able to anticipate this type of maneuver. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then Thrawn does it and wipes out that New Republic group. And he's like, great, cool, let's move on. And he's very, very calm and measured the whole time. He's never scared. Now that can get into a little bit of, in my opinion, kind of almost, this is harsh, but fantasy racism. It's like, the one of them painted this way, therefore they're all like this. And it's kind of, it's just like, all right, that's uncomfy. But it's they have avoided all that on Rebels by saying, I got Sabine's art, I now know about Sabine. I got Hera's art, I now know about Hera. It's just it's a completely different type of villain than Palpatine. This is the purely cerebral thinker that can find out something about you and then learn the way that you think and know how to outsmart you. Now, for all of my love of Dave Filoni, they have yet to really execute that, in my opinion. It's like you said, and we made fun of it earlier on the show, like, Admiral Thrawn, the whole ship is burning up. We will win eventually. The entire crew has been lost. This is but a small loss in the grand plan. They will be the architects. It's like, what are you talking about? They're not going to be the architects of their own destruction. You have lost. Admit that you've lost. But I think that's also because, well, for a while, I thought it was that this was a Disney XD show, and you needed to have the characters win. And so to keep Thrawn from just shaking his fist at the sky, I'll get you next week, rebels, that had to be a, we will win very soon. And he has moments of brilliance, but it was clunky to make it seem like he's always winning when he's not. Ahsoka was a little better at that, but there were still some moments of he has clearly just lost, and he's acting like he hasn't.
He
But
wins
so
at the end of the day.
He does win, and he gets a very great villain monologue of Ahsoka, you're not going to end up any different than your master, and we might face off again, but not today. Bye. And then he goes back to the main galaxy. But the only other thing I got to say about Thrawn is I remember losing my ever-loving mind when they announced that he was returning. I was speaking. This is a roommate story, roommate episode, because both of y'all have been my roommates at one point. I was a roommate of Zach at the time, and I was watching the live stream of Star Wars Celebration, which is something they used to let us do, and we were watching the panel for Star Wars Rebels, and we saw the trailer live, and when organ music started coming in, and when you saw the statues of the Issa Lamiri lizards, which is deep cut legends, I remember standing up and screaming. And then sure enough, Grand Admiral Thrawn appeared, and as we said earlier in the episode, I molted and sprinted around the
It was the
apartment.
second time it was in the paper. People were like, we need to get him checked out.
Like, who's this guy that keeps shedding skin and running around? That's all I'd say. I like Thrawn. You talk about canonizing legends. I thought overall, I'm happy that he's here, and I thought they did a real good job.
Yeah.
And so there's my novel. Zach, to you.
Yeah. First of all, Thrawn as art concept executed perfectly. Like, his look is great. The Issa Lamiri as like on his shoulders, but they're statues. Fantastic nod to the legends. The organ music is one of the best music pieces to come out of Rebels, period. And maybe even the Clone Wars. Like, come out of animation. That song slaps. That it's so it does. It's so like evil and like grand, and the Chimera, all of the design aspects I think were done really, really well. I also ran into him like you two, where it's like, okay, because in the books, we talked about it when Tabletop was here. In the books, he doesn't lose. Like, he's just like, okay, cool, I've outmaneuvered you in my mind. You think you've won, and then I turn it around and I've won. In the books, and Lance, to get you to read the second book is all about him and Vader working together. And spoilers, he figures out who Vader is because he had worked with Anakin Skywalker at one point. He goes, "Oh, I know who you are." Because I am smart, and Vader's like, "I'm gonna murder you." He's like, no, we're both working for the Emperor, it's fine. But his, like, in that first canon Zahn book, his rise through the Empire is really, really interesting to see, and like the steps he takes, and it does a good job of what the show doesn't, of just being like, okay, yeah, there's a setback here, but I am gonna win eventually, and then he does. I think in Rebels, it's like, okay, yeah, you got the TIE Defender, great, that really was bad, and then they blew up your thing, and then the whales came, and that's the first time you realize that you could lose, because he does. That's the first time we see emotion on his face, is when the whales come, and he's like, yeah, and then
space whales.
Yeah. But I agree. I thought the actor's great. I think it's not Mads Mikkelsen. It's his older brother,
Lars Mikkelsen.
Lars Mikkelsen.
Yeah, brother?
His brother, his older brother. Yeah. I think he's such a great voice for it. I'm so glad that they brought him back in Ahsoka, because he is such an iconic. He does do a really good job of portraying the cerebral, even though you're like, wait, are you sure that you got this, dude? Because you're not winning a lot. But
I like the confidence.
But I do. The voice, I believe you. I just don't see the evidence, man. But I'm glad he's in universe, and I thought that was the biggest swing to take something from Legends, because it's a blue guy with red eyes, like to bring him into universe, I thought was pretty cool. But moving on to my favorite character that they brought back, Lance, would you like to talk about Ahsoka?
Yeah, I'll be brief, because I really want to hear what you have to say about Ahsoka. She's kind of your girl. So I loved her being on there. The Vader duel was
so good.
One of the most emotional. I mean, I went through all 5 emotions trying to get through that duel as a spectator, but it's great. I think that I think it's important for us to see her with her new character model as an adult, because even in Clone Wars, even in the the later seasons of Clone Wars, where she's mature, she's still a teenager, and they're still kind of drawing her as a teenager, right? And so it's still like, little Ahsoka, little snips, as it were, doing her thing. but now we get to see wise, kind of almost the Obi-Wan wise Jedi that's advising everybody from the background. And the most important thing is they're just keeping Ahsoka alive. I need Ahsoka to be in every franchise so that they just keep her going, because eventually they're going to write an Ahsoka death. Yeah. They have to at some point. She can't live forever. But every time she makes it through a series, I celebrate.
Years from now, it's like Yoda. She's going to live 800, 900 years. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, what did we decide she is? She's a Tortuga?
Togruta.
Togruta.
Tortuga is from...
is a turtle.
Yes.
But she... I can never remember what the other one is, so I always just call her a Tortuga. But we don't know how long they live. So...
True.
Maybe she's still doing great. This was a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I got to say about Ahsoka.
Matt?
Right on. Well, real funny. Real quick.
Real
I think
funny.
This is funny. There you go. It's the first blooper
funny.
we've had in a while. So I want to remember, you want to talk about another freaking out, running around the apartment. I probably didn't shed my skin this time, but I do remember screaming and running around. When we all knew she was Fulcrum. It was pretty straightforward. But if you try hard, you could. I had a strong suspicion. I was like, who else? Okay, maybe it was just me. I was like, who else could it be? But still, when she walked in, like Fulcrum, Ahsoka Tano. I freaked out, ran around the apartment, texted Zach, and I was like, Ahsoka! And I remember this. You said, who? Who's Ashoka? And I was like, Zach, Ahsoka Tano from Clone Wars. Oh, what? Anyway, again, I was still building my friends at this point. But it was almost 2 years to the day after the last aired episode of Clone Wars had come out where she left the Jedi, and we had no idea where she was, what the rest of her story was, if she was dead or not. Dave was trolling everybody. This was the first stretch of time where he was trolling everyone about, Ahsoka might live, I don't know. But then it was almost 2 years to the day that episode aired, and she came back as Fulcrum. And one of the all-time great reunion lines in any franchise ever, jump into season 2, when she meets up with Captain Rex, who is now bald and has a gray beard and has put on some weight. Ahsoka walks up to him, and his first words to her, "You got old." It's so great. And just that story of us getting to see her deal with Anakin Skywalker has become Darth Vader.
Yeah.
So good. Just awesome stuff.
Yeah,
and then
eyes.
Exactly. And just for years we've heard, and Filoni has said now that for years he thought that was the episode where Ahsoka dies. That there were early versions of that story being on Clone Wars, of her getting hunted down by Darth Vader. And there was an early version of the end of the Clone Wars show, that one of the last things Dave Filoni was going to show kids on that show was Darth Vader killing Ahsoka. Let's just say, super happy that didn't happen. And I'm pretty sure he knew. He was like, I think he's like, yeah, that would have been amazing television, but it would have been a little dark. But then for years, he was just trolling Ashley Eckstein, the actress that plays her. And everybody going, I don't know, if you fought Darth Vader, it probably wouldn't work out. We're going to have to see. And then after that wild, ambiguous ending of Twilight of the Apprentice, where we don't see what happens to her, she goes wandering into the temple, right? We'd just gotten her back after years of not knowing where she was, and then he keeps it ambiguous. He spent 2 years going, I don't know. Might be dead, might be not. I guess one of my favorite moments was at the end of that there was a Star Wars Celebration meetup of like a fan group called Ahsoka Lives, and they're all wearing Ahsoka Lives t-shirts, and Dave Filoni had one made that was Ahsoka Lives ? He got a picture taken, and he's like, I don't know. It's just so great, and then just the through line of her dealing with Anakin Skywalker, having fallen to the dark side and becoming, in her words, so vile, to then her getting rescued by Ezra. We'll get into that later, and then moving forward into Mandalorian, her not being able to train Grogu because Grogu has attachments, and she's seen what that does. when you're a Jedi that has attachments. And of course, we ever get around to reviewing the Ahsoka show, we'll talk about this more later. But I said this in the Clone Wars episode. Luke Skywalker is probably my favorite fictional character. The only thing that the only thing that changes that is that I think he's kind of not very consistently written in all of this modern era. However, Ahsoka, she probably is my favorite Star Wars hero. She only edges out Luke because she is consistently written through all of it. Her on Rebels is great. There's a part of me that wishes that she had taken the Kanan Jarrus place, right? And that she had been Ezra's master from the jump. But I love Kanan, and so I think that's great. But overall, yeah, I could go on and on and on and on about Ahsoka, but I won't, so that we won't be here for 3 hours. So, Zach, to you.
I will. No, Ahsoka, I've said it many times, is my favorite character. My Star Wars tattoo is that I have the fulcrum symbol on my back, because I thought, like Lance pointed, I didn't know it was going to be Ahsoka. Like, I was like, oh, cool, fulcrum. Yeah, cool, that symbol. Not realizing it's literally her tattoo on her forehead, you know? But I shed my skin that day when I finally saw the episode, and it's so great. It's such a great way to bring her back, and you don't have all of that knowledge of what happened on Mandalore, but like Ashley's such a great actress that she plays it even not knowing what happened. She has to have her go from her like kid voice to like really just using her voice for Ahsoka is really, really cool. All of the stuff with Darth Vader is absolutely amazing. I mean, I've said it before on the podcast, but that season 2 ending, I remember bawling my eyes out because I thought she was dead, and one of my favorite characters. And I was like, because it's so ambiguous. Like, she like walks down, and you like, is that Ahsoka? Is she going into the afterlife? What is going on? And then Dave Filoni releases some Topps trading cards of her underneath, and you're like, what? What is this, Dave? What is this? She's in water, and there's the owl. Is she like going to the afterlife? Like, why are you wearing Ahsoka lives ? And then when he finally announced that she does live and has the exclamation point, which is the payoff of that shirt. But yeah, I was so here for all of Ahsoka and her character development and her connecting with the worst drawn Yoda ever, which should have gone to my dislikes. Potato Yoda. But yeah, no, I was so here for everything that she did in that show, and her she had some great character development, and like her being that secondary teacher to Ezra and offering like different levels of knowledge that Kanan didn't have because he was a baby Padawan when he left the Jedi Order, and just all of her wisdom. It was really cool to see her in a wise way, and then to see her again in Mandalorian and the Ahsoka show. It's very interesting to see her development from Rebels to that, because she almost does the Luke Skywalker thing in Last Jedi, but does it better. She's just kind of disillusioned a little bit. She's like, oh, attachments, I don't know. And even her stuff with Sabine, she's like, I tried to train her, but I'm bad. It was almost like they were like, okay, cool. We kind of messed up with Luke. I think we can do it right with Ahsoka, where she's like, I'm just a bad teacher. I'm too connected to Anakin, and he became Darth Vader. If Luke had just been like, hey, like, I'm a bad teacher, I'm the son of Darth Vader, which he does say, but I don't know. I feel like they kind of like finally, swung at it the right way in Ahsoka, versus The Last Jedi. But yeah, I'm here for it. I love her character development, and I think Rebels is where she really becomes my favorite character. She's great in Clone Wars, and you don't have season 7 when Rebels comes out, and you're like, oh, cool, like, this great character, she left the Jedi Order, that's really cool. But like, to see her like, with the lightsabers too, and you're like, lightsabers, how the heck did that happen? And she has 2 of them, and they're really big, and just to, it was such a great way of of developing that character and bringing in all of that Lord of the Rings lore of her being Gandalf and
It's true.
It's true.
Ahsoka the
Lance.
White.
Ahsoka the White.
Works better in Star Wars.
I don't disagree.
Well, we've talked enough about the other side characters. Let's talk about the crew, the Ghost. Lance, you want to send your thoughts on the Ghost crew?
Yeah, I've been sitting here this whole time thinking about this whole Firefly in Star Wars, because it's really so. I know that just because you're listening to this podcast does not mean that you know about Firefly. But the characters on that show, the crew on that show, the ensemble cast worked really well because they had this family, and not like we're all family, but like they had mother, father, and children. Like the different characters fulfilled those roles, and it's the same way in Rebels. You know, you have Kanan and Hera. That they are mom and dad.
Yeah.
Like everybody pretty much treats them like mom and dad, right? And then Zeb is like either young uncle or older brother to Ezra. And they have this really great like rivalry that kind of develops into this beautiful, beautiful friendship.
Yeah.
And Ezra has a great relationship with Kanan, and that's his mentor. And when he gets taken away, it's a profound grief for Ezra. But I feel like his relationship with Zeb, is really profound. Is really one of the most beautiful things in the show, because Zeb doesn't want him there, and you see that in the first episode. He doesn't want him there, but he kind of has a soft spot for him. And then they keep saving each other's lives back and forth, and so it gets to a point to where I think Zeb cares more about Ezra on the crew than anybody else.
Yeah.
Which is great. And then I think I love, especially in the first season, Ezra's unsuccessful hitting on Sabine all the time is so funny. Like the absolute no game, all confidence. You know, very Aladdin, as you said.
Yeah.
But not working out for him. But they, like I said before, they gave us this team of people that we all grew to care about almost instantly, which is a difficult thing to do with everybody being as cynical as they are about everything right now. And how is it possible that we're still... This is a Disney XD show from 10 years ago. And how is it possible that these characters are still being made? Disney is still investing millions and millions of dollars into these characters. We're getting live action Zeb. How is that? How is that?
And he's
going
to be in a movie.
Yeah,
he's going to be in Mando and Grogu.
Yeah, they're doubling down on these Disney XD cartoon characters from 10 years ago, and it's because they're so well written. And the cast, the ensemble together works so well. Now, we talked before about Sabine, and I want to say it then, but I was going to save it and talk to about it now when we're talking about the crew. I think, and I don't know as much about writing as you two guys do, but I think when you have an ensemble cast, you always have characters that get left behind in the writing. And I think Sabine often got left behind in the writing. And she was used more as a plot device than she was a character. Up until the several times that they do use her as a character. But it's almost a different Sabine when they do that than it is in the other times. And so what they would do is they'd have, you know, the different parts of the crew fulfilling these different, you know, adventures or arching plots or whatever. And then when they needed kind of cement around the edges of it, Sabine would come in and fill those roles. She was just an extra crew person.
Yeah.
And she was really interesting and we all really liked her, but she wasn't a real person up until the latter seasons, especially when they got into the Darksaber. So anyway. Matt,
your thought on the crew?
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. I love the crew. I think it's so fun. I forgot to say this earlier, but it's worth bringing up. but the idea of a crew of, the Firefly story style, right? Just a crew of randoms finding their way through a much bigger conflict. That was Dave Filoni's first pitch for the Clone Wars show.
Oh.
And then George was like, no, it's about Anakin and Obi-Wan and their adventures. Give the kids what they want. And he was like, okay. But Ahsoka was originally just a character design for one of the crew members, right? He's like, I don't know, here's a little Jedi kid. This could be fun. Probably similar to what Sabine ended up being in many ways. Just Sabine was a Mandalorian and not a Jedi, right? But I love that they're all archetypal Star Wars characters, but they're all very, very distinct. R2-D2 is a dog, Chopper is a cat. That's the simplest way to describe those two characters, right? And that makes them both lovable and fun in their very own ways. Just that, Chopper will kill you if you annoy him, or at least try to. R2-D2 would never do that.
Chopper is dark.
Chopper, when they steal that one Imperial droid and like the hull doors are closing and they're flying over the planet and they're like, well, we got a new one, and Chopper's like, and pushes the droid off the ship, and all the other characters are literally like, oh my god, and then you see him like land and the droid's okay, but they're all like, you just straight up killed him. And Chopper doesn't care and just rolls away laughing.
There's a video of somebody compiled all of the war crimes that Chopper commits during those episodes.
It's the best. But we've talked about Kanan, we've talked about Sabine and Ezra, but just to give some love to the other two, Hera Syndulla, man, give me more Hera content, and we're getting it. I think that she is going to be a character that's going to continue on after the Mandalorian verse has had its day, because I'm telling you right now, Jacen Syndulla is going to end up at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that we will get those stories after the Mandoverse has had its time, that then we'll kind of move on into that next chunk. And I want to see Jacen Syndulla hanging out with Luke and Ben, and Hera being kind of like, just a contact for Luke Skywalker and everything else. I would think that would be really, really cool. Yeah. And then, it's funny. The last member of the crew, who we've hardly even mentioned yet, you want to talk about being a plot device with no character development. Gara Zeb Aurelios, man. Like, now he does get stuff, but for a lot of the time it's, I'm Zeb and I'm angry. I'm here to be the muscle and that's it. And I really think it's cool. Lance talked about the Force getting weird on this show. The World Between Worlds is weird. I don't think it's weirder than Gara Zeb plugging in his bow staff into the hyperdrive that now makes the ship able to travel through a black hole and find a secret Lasat planet, which it's cool. Again, at the time, I was like, what is this? This is not Star Wars. And now I'm like, it's cool because it's fun and it's different, and your stories don't all need to be the same. If anything, they should be breaking new ground. But I really like Zeb overall, but it's oddly enough, it was kind of the opposite of Sabine. I thought that he has more to do in the first couple seasons, and then gets less and less and less to do. Now, one of the things that's come out since then is Steve Bloom, the actor that portrays him, he got very, very busy. He was not available very much, and then I think he had some kind of injury where he just had to miss a lot. I might be just talking out of my butt, so if I'm wrong, whatever. But I thought I remember something where he just wasn't available as much, so they had to put him on the back burner. But the Star Wars, Dave Filoni said it many times, is about found family, and probably the best found family in Star Wars is the crew of the Rebels. Mm-hmm. It's just awesome. The last thing I forgot to say in my likes, but just to mention the crew. Without this crew, the Rebel Alliance potentially doesn't get to exist. Because I forgot to mention, they're the ones that rescue Mon Mothma. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that get her to like the rallying point and get her to where she can set up the signal to rally all of the Rebel Alliance. I supremely doubt that we're going to see that moment on Andor Season 2, but I also really hope they don't overwrite that moment and say that it was, I don't know, that she was, whatever. Anyway, I just don't want them to be like, nah, man, we're going to do the depressing version of this. But anyway, there's a random Andor comment. But that's all my thoughts on the crew. And Zach, to you, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I love this crew. I do agree that, like, I think Zeb gets focused more in the beginning, and Sabine gets focused at the end. But I don't think there's anything wrong with seeing a strong, capable young lady kicking ass.
Me neither. That's not what I was trying to say.
No. I know. I'm
I
not.
thought that's what you were saying.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, Matt. That's what you said. And she's cool. She's the cool older sister, or I mean, they're not brother and sister, but she's the cool older sister, but she's also I guess she's the cool girl next door that you have a crush on, and she listens to the rock music and spray paints her room, she's a cool character design. I really enjoyed her, and I think all of her Mandalorian stuff is so good, and it sets up the Mandalorian universe. We get the War of Mandalore. That's the first time we hear about the War of Mandalore, and see the desolation of the planet after the Empire and stuff like that, or during the Empire. Not after the Empire.
We find out that they're rising up, but she hands over the Darksaber, and then we don't see any of it again until the Mandalorian, and we're like, what happened?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, and you get Bo-Katan. We haven't talked about Bo-Katan, but all of that Mandalorian stuff, all of the Mandalorian is built upon that arc in Rebels. So I think all that stuff is great. I love Zeb as a character. For our listeners that might not know, Zeb as a character design was the original design for Chewbacca. Which is really cool, and wow, how different that would be.
Well, and they make a joke about that in there. They say, "What? You haven't ever seen a hairless Wookiee before?"
Yeah. And I think it was such a cool reuse of that Ralph McQuarrie design. You get a lot of Ralph McQuarrie designs in this show, which I really enjoy. And yeah, Hera is such a great character. I'm so glad. I remember when Rogue One came out, and they just have that one little line of Hera Syndulla to the council chamber or whatever it is, and you see Chopper just in the background, just and I remember freaking out, being like, "She's alive! She's here!" She makes it through, because you never know. You never know if your characters are there. And then to have the Ghost appear in Rogue One, and then the Ghost appear in Episode 9, that character, or the ship model, just really cool the way that they've taken the show and really intertwined it into film, live action canon. And I think one of the first animated to do it. You don't see Resistance anywhere, You don't see Jedi Young Adventures anywhere. You see some stuff from Clone Wars, but not. I guess Ahsoka, but a lot of that stuff, is just kind of stuck to the cartoons. So to see it make that jump, and to have Ahsoka be Rebels season 5 or 4 or whatever it is, and then I haven't really talked about it, but Kanan is one of my top 10 Jedi, I think. For me, I think he is your reluctant hero rather than Ezra being your reluctant hero archetype, which is so great. And that when I don't know if you guys remember, but when he had the lightsaber in 2 different parts and then puts it together, I remember just being like, "What? You can do that? What do you mean the lightsaber comes apart? And to disguise it, and him, only using the Force because he has to, and being that no, I don't want to be a Jedi, I don't want to train this kid, but I have to because he's Force sensitive, and is just that reluctant, he's your Han Solo turned hero, but better, and more mature. So I love the Ghost crew. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the crew. Lance, let's hear your thoughts on the World Between Worlds, one of the wildest things to come out of the Force.
Yeah, so I think that we need to see what is going to become of the World Between Worlds, because I think it's pretty clear they're not done with it yet. I think that time travel is messy, and I think that it has the ability to make nothing really matter if you can't. If you can just go back and fix anything. That's one of the reasons I don't really like time travel as a plot device. And I'm glad that they saved Ahsoka. So I'm grateful for it in this instance, but I really hope that we don't get into, was it phase 4 of Marvel, where everything is just crazy and you can't keep track of anything because you can just open up this world between worlds with the little Filoni wolves and go run in there and run back across the galaxy. I think they're going to use it to try to get back into the main galaxy in Ahsoka, which everybody thinks that, and which usually turns out to be true. I think it's cheap. I think it can be cheap. I also think that I'm maybe projecting my thoughts of what the Force is and what the Force is capable of being onto a universe that gets to decide for itself what the Force is and what the Force is capable of being. But I think that time travel really messed up and space travel really messed up Marvel. And I think it has the ability to really mess up Star Wars if it gets out of hand.
Mm-hmm. Matt?
Yeah. Well, so I don't disagree, but
Sounds
I
like you
do
disagree.
think. Well, no. Like I fundamentally agree that time travel is it destroys all consequences of storytelling, right? If used irresponsibly. However, I think in this instance, for how they have characterized the world between worlds, in the first time it's shown in that episode, they make it clear it is not a fix-all. Because yes, he saves Ahsoka, and then he's like, oh, I can go save Kanan, and she's like, don't do that. If you save him, y'all are all dead. She doesn't say y'all, but she's like, you're going to undo his
it's country
sacrifice.
Ahsoka.
I'm from Texas.
Y'all all dead, I swear.
Y'all are all dead.
Why
I'm
you
a
doing
Shoka
that?
Tanner. I'm a Shoka Tanner.
Anakin
Anyway,
was
whatever.
my master.
Anakin was the best of the Jedis. That's gonna come back to haunt me. Anyway,
That's our soundbite.
we got to make that a drop. Anakin was the best of the Jedis. But they establish in that episode that it is not, strictly speaking, time travel. That like it is, but like it will have consequences and it will change things, and he has to let her go. What I think he has to let Kanan go again. What I think the world between worlds is what you get as you transition into the world between worlds for the first time, right? You hear the Ben Kenobi quote that the Force binds the galaxy together. I think the world between worlds is that made manifest. It's like, absolutely, the Force exists connecting everything, and this is that visualized. There is a world between all of the worlds, right? And I think part of why Ahsoka has been able to traverse this twice is because this is speculation time. I'll put my speculation hat on. We forget she died in the Mortis arc, and then the Force gods brought her back to life, and that from time to time throughout her journey, we're seeing that Mortis owl follow her around, right? It's just always kind of present. I hope Filoni never explains exactly what that means, because I think that would undo all of the fun of this, right?
Yeah.
But also, just if he never gets specific, it can mean whatever we want it to mean. But I think there's some Mortis-y stuff happening with Ahsoka that is part of why she, dies for the second time on the Ahsoka show and ends up in the world between worlds, so that Anakin Skywalker can meet with her one last time and get her over her grief. Right? And then she comes out, and now she is wearing white. She's not wearing gray anymore. And now she's being lighter and brighter, and she's hugging people, and she's being friendly, and she's not being a closed-off douchebag like she has been for the last little while. That she had to get over. It's not her fault what happened to Anakin, right? But I really, really, really like the World Between Worlds. It's one of my favorite things that they've done. I do think there's something to what Lance has been talking about, that for a while, from 1983 or from 1977 up until 2014 when the Clone Wars premiered, the Force was pretty much, you use it to push and pull stuff and trick minds, you do some lightning, and you choke people. And that's about what it is, right? And then you get into some funky stuff on Clone Wars where, like, but really the only other thing that was new was they made zombies, right? The Night Sisters could do weird stuff. Then you get into Rebels, and Ezra's way into the Force is communing with animals. He's Dr. Doolittle. And now the World Between Worlds exists. I think it could be a number of things. It could just be that this is a new era so that they're going to play. It could also be, like I said earlier, George isn't part of the team anymore, so now they're going to go nuts. Right? And to Dave, he wants the Force to be still the Force, but that there's a lot of different things you can do with it, right? That it is universal. And so that's my take on the World Between Worlds. Lance, your mouth opened like you had something to say.
I did have something to say.
Okay.
So I think, and y'all talked about, I do actually listen to this show. Y'all talked about this last week. But I think that the stakes are not the same for television as they are for movies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Maybe they should be, but they're not. And I think the stakes are not the same for a cartoon on Disney XD as they are maybe some of the other pieces of the franchise. So I think being a show like Star Wars Rebels gives them the opportunity to play without maybe some of the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get to try the Force out doing different things. They get to be a little messier, a little bit of a shotgun approach to things, and see what happens. And then what works gets workshopped and bumped up into the major leagues, and what doesn't dies on cartoon.
Yeah,
I think that's true.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I think something that's also important with the World Between Worlds that hasn't been mentioned yet is it's not very easy to get into. You know, like Ezra had to like go to that mural and like, you know, had to like Indiana Jones figure it out with the you know, the father, the son, and the daughter. And that was the only entrance that he could find, and then he destroys it. You know, he makes sure it's destroyed so that the Empire can't get to it. The only other people we see enter the World Between Worlds are, it's Palpatine and maybe Dooku. I can't remember. I know it's Palpatine. He's getting into it with the dark magic, but they push him out. And then Ahsoka. But Ahsoka only enters it because, one, Ezra pulls her into it, and then two, she dies. You know? It's almost like it could be like argued that it could be like a little bit of purgatory, you know, because I don't know if she's pretty much dead in that Ahsoka episode. And Anakin's there and he's able to fully Force Ghost. Maybe that's where the Force Ghosts go. You know, like that's maybe how you become a little blue ghost, is you're in the World Between Worlds and you're able to like go to the different areas and like give, you know, wisdom. I think as a tool, it has to be used sparingly, and I think that they have done so, which is great. I think it's a very great, cool concept, and that, again, you just can't use it all the time. I agree with you, Lance. If it gets like Phase 4 of Marvel, where you're just going back in time and back in time and back in time, like, it cheapens cheapens him saving Ahsoka. If he did save Ahsoka, I mean, you could argue that he just pulled her out and that she was still saved at the end, you know. But yeah.
Well, yeah. So, was Qui-Gon the first Force? Well, Qui-Gon, not really Qui-Gon. Was Obi-Wan the first Force ghost, or
Qui-Gon,
was he the first one in a long time?
Qui-Gon was the first one.
Yeah.
That's
Ever?
like a Clone Wars double. So far as we know, to the
'Cause
point that
I always kind of thought that he kind of rediscovered this ability, but I guess I don't really say that.
No.
that's probably what it was in Legends, mostly out of a retcon, because there are lots of comics and novels where thousands of years before the Skywalker saga, there were shadowy blue people, right? That I think they kind of used to think of that's what all Jedi do. But then on Clone Wars, Yoda's like, I heard Qui-Gon Jinn's voice, and the whole council's like, okay, the Muppet's going crazy. He's too old. Let's commune with him for like a whole night and see if we can hear Qui-Gon. We can't, and they're literally going, he's losing his marbles. This is bad. What are we gonna do?
Well,
so they literally think he's nuts.
We hear it in Attack of the Clones, the movie. we hear Qui-Gon.
Yeah, you hear Qui-Gon's voice for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
And Yoda hears it. Nobody else does.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Because I'm just imagining, Zach, what you said, if this is where the Force Ghosts go. Because now, because it's not a whole bunch of Force Ghosts. You get like 5 Force Ghosts on like the Thrawn sidewalks, just like going around.
Just doing laps for all
Yeah, that
eternity.
would be really awkward, like Maul walking. These
I think that
lights.
I think to double down on the world between worlds of it all, I think it's also kind of between the, I guess, the physical realm and the what Yoda calls the netherworld of the Force. I think it's between all of it. That's why Anakin can step into it. It may very well be, like you said, Zach, that like that's what the Force ghosts use to manifest in the physical realm. They kind of have to pass through this, but I almost kind of see it as it's the highway. It's the on-ramp.
Yeah, well,
between the
it's
afterlife.
Narnia. I don't know if y'all are Narnia people or not, but it's the woods that have all the different ponds in it, where you can just walk around and step into the different ponds and step into these different aspects of the universe.
Yeah.
That's cool. I've only read the first book.
Hmm.
So, does that come into play in the first book? Because it's also been since I was a little kid.
No.
Oh, well, sorry.
You have to be a real fan. I'm gonna gatekeep.
Isn't there like a shape-shifting gorilla later on in the franchise?
Well, he's not shape-shifting. He's a gorilla, but he wears a costume of a lion skin to make people think he's a lion.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, there's some Narnia lore for.
And Lance, closing thoughts on 10 years of Star Wars Rebels.
Well, I'm really glad we got it right. So I'm really glad that we got what would this be? Clone Wars season 7, I guess, which is ultimately what Rebels could have been.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm really glad now we're getting Star Wars Rebels season 5 with live action Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
So just like when we had the conversation about the Clone Wars, there's so much about what we know in the Star Wars lore that we take for granted has always been there, and it hasn't. It comes from this TV show. It's interesting when you go back and really sit down and think about this, how much stair-stepping and scaffolding there is to Star Wars.
Yeah.
You think that these things have been there forever, but they haven't. So I'm grateful and that's why it's important to keep creating these TV shows and keep creating this media, because it helps build this franchise so much, even when you don't really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You think about shows like The Acolyte and everything that brought us, and everything that we are not gonna get, from the rest of it. So let's be pro Star Wars media in the future.
Yeah. Matt, closing
Right on.
thoughts?
Pro Star Wars media. Yeah, everything we said. If it's not clear, we love Rebels, and we think you should watch it. If you haven't seen it, you've been spoiled to death now, but there's so much other good stuff that we didn't talk about. And it's about the journey more than the destination. But speaking of the destination, Dave Filoni had a quote about the end of this show that I absolutely loved, because it ends on this really, really beautiful epilogue of wrapping up everybody's story. And it's funny, the cast didn't know what happens in the epilogue until they saw the episode. The Tira Sircar, the actor that portrays Sabine, she knew some of it, but I mean, she was the first to know that Kanan and Hera had a kid. Nobody else knew. And so when the cast was watching the finale, they were all like, "What? No way!" They lost their minds. But Dave Filoni said that these stories end and they begin, and they end and they begin, and those things should be pretty much the same, which is why he ends that show not on a cliffhanger. It is done. But he ends it on, here's everybody that their story is over, but Ahsoka and Sabine have more to do. They got to go get Ezra. And then it was about 5 years before we got more of that story. he didn't know that it was going to be live action, but he purposely left that door open. And I'm happy that he left that door open, and I want to see where it goes, because I think we're going to get a lot more live action Rebels stuff. At least that's my prediction. Because while I said earlier, Jon Favreau might want to move on to other stuff, make more original things or whatever he wants to do, I think Dave Filoni's in the bag for these Star Warses for
He's the chief creative officer, so he better be.
Yeah. They C-suited him, so he's there forever.
Yeah, he's set, which
he gets part of those bonuses now.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm jealous. But anyway, what do you do for your living? I get to make Star Wars. All right, but Zach, closing thoughts on Star Wars Rebels.
I mean, again, similar thoughts to Clone Wars. So happy it exists. Great show. I think essential viewing for Star Wars fans if you're wanting to know everything that's going on. I had a friend who recently, it was a couple years ago, but he was like, "Oh my gosh, I finally watched Rebels. It's so good." And I was like, "Yeah, it's really great." And he's like, "The Maul stuff." I was like, "I know." So hopefully, if you're listening to this and you haven't watched Star Wars Rebels, maybe we have convinced you a little bit to watch it. It moves a lot quicker than Clone Wars, and it's a little bit easier to follow. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it.
Right on. Go watch it. And as for what you will go watch next, we have some speculation time. Because kind of like Zach said, I agree. I see Rebels as kind of like essential Star Wars viewing. In many ways, almost more than like Solo, that film. Like, if you want to know what's happening in the Star Wars story, Rebels, they've made it very, very crucial. Like Zach said, The Mandalorian gets set up by Star Wars Rebels, right? Everything with the Darksaber. So we've had really 3 kind of flagship Lucasfilm animation shows, and that would be Clone Wars, Rebels, and now Bad Batch. Bad Batch has ended. In many ways, I think tying a final bow on the Clone Wars era. There's this couple stories that are still kind of dangling that have not been dealt with yet. But as for this speculation time, what do you guys think is the next show? Like, what do you think it would be about? The next Star Wars animation show. Let's start with Lance. Just anything. Just what do you think they're going to do?
Well, I think, they've got a couple of timelines, or not really timelines, but a couple of time spans that they're comfortable playing in, and Star Wars is always so selective about that. When they open up an era, you get to play in that era.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're looking at either something New Republic, which there could be an opportunity for a really great Hera Syndulla New Republic show.
Yeah.
Especially with all of the canceled projects that have been thrown around a lot. I think that there could be a really great X-Wing show. I think also there's going to try to be a salvation of what do they call the 100 years before
The
High Republic.
High Republic.
The High Republic, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's going to try to be a salvation for High Republic. And there again, Star Wars animation, you can go a lot lower stakes and try to rebuild kind of some trust in that era after the Acolyte before they jump back into something more, I don't want to say more important, but something with higher stakes, something with more money behind it.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned earlier the Jedi Academy. I don't think that they're ready yet to invest in de-aging an actor to that level
series, yeah.
For a whole series. I also don't think they're ready to recast Luke Skywalker while Mark Hamill is still alive and tweeting. So I think that that if that was going to be animated, it can happen right now.
Yeah.
If it's going to be live action, I don't think it's going to be for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, any of those, if I was going to take a guess.
Right on. Zach, to you, what's the future of Star Wars animation?
Yeah, I think you can go a couple of different ways. I do think a Acolyte era, is a great idea especially because they left so much open. You could get a Plagueis show, which would be really cool. You could get, just even The Stranger and Ocean May just as animated. I think would be a budget-friendly, cool way to finish that story. I would also love to see, we mentioned it earlier, the fall of Maul. From Crime Syndicate to Old Master. I think that would be a fun way to play. But I would really love what you said, Lance. I think the Jedi Academy, I think, would be a great animated show. But if they don't do that, my one that I really want to see is Hera leading like an Alphabet Squadron style thing, where it's like, do Resistance but do it better. Have a New Republic fighter pilot show that kind of, take some of the stuff that you had for Rogue Squadron from that movie, kind of take all of that, Top Gun-esque fighter pilot stories that they've been doing really well in the books, and make that a show. That's what I think is probably the easiest to do with the least amount of stakes of like ruining or touching anything else, and because there's so much going on with the Mandoverse, that you can kind of do that whole thing. But that's my pitch. Matt,
right on. So I got good news, I guess. Actually, Zach mentioned Rogue Squadron. I saw something, an interview, it was actually from earlier this year that I missed when we talked about Rogue Squadron earlier on the podcast, where they've said that movie is still in development. It's not done. It's not finished like we thought it was. Like, they are still actively talking about it, which is more than we can say about the Taika Waititi film or the Kevin Feige film, where they have said that's done. That's indefinitely on hold, aka probably not going to happen. I think that a Hera show would be on the back burner for a little bit, only because they've just cast Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and you're probably going to want to save all of that for live action.
Yeah.
But what I think, and I'm the missing piece in Star Wars canon right now is Ben Solo and Luke Skywalker. It sets up the original, the sequel trilogy. That's what makes those movies take place, right? The fall of Ben. We need to see that story. I would love to see it in animation, because I think that gives you so much freedom. Like y'all said, that was loud.
I'm
Zach,
so sorry.
quit your slurping.
I'm so sorry.
It's just funny.
I'm so sorry.
A Dianoga came out of the trash compactor and tried to attack Zach. But anywho, oh gosh. But that's the missing piece of Star Wars canon, and I think if you do it in animation, you can do it right now, and it gives you lots of freedom. But I think kind of what y'all have said, that is such a major story, it wouldn't surprise me if they wanted to wait to do it in live action, or really, they will probably want to wait until, like I said, this Mandoverse story has finished, because now that they have shown that Luke Skywalker is around and active, they don't want to paint themselves into a corner, where they do something where, dang, Luke can't show up in this movie now because we have established that he is doing this on his Jedi Academy show.
Yeah.
Because I would also wager, when we get this New Republic movie, young Ben Solo's probably going to show up in the care of Luke Skywalker.
Probably.
And that'll be the catalyst into the next era, right? But what I think they're going to do, I mentioned before, I think it was last week when we talked about Bad Batch, they pretty much put a bow on everything involving the Clone Wars except Hondo Ohnaka. And they did have a cameo for, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget her name. The Night Sister, she was Dooku's assassin.
Asajj Ventress?
There you go. Thank you. You saved me. Yeah. Asajj Ventress. They had her show up in a one-episode cameo, which, looking at that and kind of squinting, it reminds me of the Bad Batch showing up in the final season of Clone Wars, right? let's see if this works. Let's see if people like this, whatever. Because, yeah, she basically shows up to confirm that Omega is not Force sensitive.
Yeah.
Was what I got out of that. But also, to me, that's like, hey, she's around.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is it is going to be either a Star Wars Pirates, right? The animation show, and it's going to be Asajj Ventress, Hondo Ohnaka, all those types of characters. We're going to get Star Wars Underworld. There will need to be a new lead character, a young Star Wars lead, right? We had Ahsoka, then we had Ezra, then we had Omega, right? It'll either be that or it'll be a Jedi Path show set up by Obi-Wan.
Oh, cool.
Right? And we're going to see kind of, the Underground Railroad, but of Jedi. Where did some of these get out? And then you could have Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress. You could also do that on Star Wars Pirates. It could be the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the cowboy Jedi, right? That's Quinlan Vos. If you don't know who that is, look him up. They confirmed on the Kenobi show, Obi-Wan's looking at the names on the wall of the other Jedi that have been through that safe house, and he goes, Quinlan was here. And he's so fulfilled.
I'm trying to remember that book. I can't remember if he died or
that was
Asajj died.
Well, that was the thing. They in Dark Disciple, the canon novel, Asajj Ventress is dead, finished, done, 100%.
Yeah.
Nuked, right?
Oh, and then they brought her back for Bad Batch.
And they brought her back, which is the whole thing. It's that things are canon until they're not, and they have shown that they will kind of retcon novels.
Yeah.
If they've got a different story idea. But I think for them to bring her back, my guess is she's going to be on the next animated show. So, and then that way, that, again, like I talk about, leaving you room to play, that leaves them room to do whatever they want in an era that's untouched, and maybe that is how they will show the fall of Darth Maul.
Yeah.
This could be a show that spans years.
Versus the crime
syndicates. And then you can get all
the
the crime syndicates, and you get Lady Kira showing up and usurping Darth Maul, right? So that's my guess. That would be a really fun show, and I would like to watch it. I want the Jedi Academy. It annoys me that they have not done that. Yeah, they don't want to de-age Darth Maul, or good lord, they don't want to de-age Mark Hamill. But they don't have to if you just hire him to do the other thing that he's good at, which is voice acting. He's proven that he's willing to do that. He
or get
did
Matt Mercer.
Luke Skywalker.
Matt Mercer does a really good young Luke Skywalker.
Absolutely, but they also just got Mark Hamill to voice Luke Skywalker on Rebuild the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Get him to voice Luke Skywalker on the Jedi Academy show, man. But I think it'll be a bit for that. Okay. So we've had a little bit of a long one. Do we want to dive into the mailbag, or do we want to put a pin in it there?
I mean, we're at 2 hours and 15.
Let's put a pin in it there.
Sorry to our mailbag that we have keep on pushing back, but we promise we'll do it.
we will do it for sure. But all right, we hope you enjoyed our breakdown and love fest of Star Wars Rebels. Takeaways from the episode, I guess, secretly convince people to be your friends and to share your same interests, because I guess that's what I've been doing, at least with you two. Really what I've been doing is I've been building podcasts co-hosts. But yeah, this is kind of our unofficial animation council, I suppose. But we love Rebels. We think you should watch it. And let us know what you feel about it. Mm-hmm. Let us know if you liked it or if you didn't, because that's fine too. All opinions are valid as long as you're not a jerk. So, Lance, where can the people find you? What all do you have going on in your real life right now?
Probably Facebook, Instagram. Just for Lance Candler would be the best way to get a hold of me, or just email the podcast, and then if it's mean, y'all won't tell me, and if it's nice, then you can let me know. That can be my little lightning rod of hate. And then outside of that, I'm just really glad to be here, really glad to be asked back, and I like taking off half a day's work to just sit here and talk about Star Wars. So
thank
you guys for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What about you, Zach?
Yeah, I'm at Zachisfaction on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. But the best part is to email us. The best way to get to me is to email us. I'm doing really good at talking today. forceofothersradio@gmail.com. We will respond or bring it on the podcast. But yeah, or in the comments of our, TikTok and YouTube and all that. We're pretty active there. So yeah, that's where you can find me. Matt, where can they find you?
I was about to say TikTok. I am on TikTok, but don't find me there because I'm not Matt. I do not want to be found. However, you can find me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, and Instagram and Facebook. Matt Beutner. What's up, Zach?
No.
Oh, okay. But I've been being very active on the show account. The show is Force of Others on Twitter and Instagram. And like Zach said, you can email us. Just interact with us wherever. We are approaching 100 subscribers on YouTube. We would love to be there before too long. If you're afraid, there's a couple of y'all that I know that like, yeah, I love your show. And I'm like, have you subscribed? And you're like, nah.
Do you get a little trophy, a little YouTube trophy for 100 followers?
No.
Nah, we got to get to but if we get to 500 and then a certain amount of watch hours, then we can start to bring you more content because then the show will start to make money. We're a ways away from that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, if you're a friend of the show, just go ahead and click that subscribe button. Comment, click, let us know.
Hit
we
that
want you to be
notification
involved. Hit that notification button. But yeah, we're really, really excited to get to do this. Thanks for coming on the show, Lance. And remember, the force of others will be with you.
Always. The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.